"Why does the princess look sad, Daddy?" The little girl asked. Then what the single dad did changed. The little girl's voice was small but clear, cutting through the quiet hum of the café as she tugged gently at her father's hand and asked, "Why does the princess look sad, Daddy?" The man followed her gaze to the woman sitting a short distance away, alone at the same long table, yet somehow separated by an invisible wall. Her shoulders slightly curved inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Her eyes fixed on her plate, rather than the world around her. And for a moment he didn't answer, because the question reached deeper than he expected, stirring something he had learned to keep buried since becoming a single parent. He squeezed his daughter's fingers, grounding himself, and studied the woman more carefully, noticing the way she moved her fork without appetite, the careful neatness of her coat and scarf, and the tired grace in her posture that suggested strength worn thin rather than broken. His daughter, legs swinging, waited patiently, her coloring book forgotten, her eyes full of the kind of concern only children have when they sense sadness without understanding its shape. "Sometimes," he finally said, choosing his words with care, "princesses carry heavy stories that don't show on the outside." But even as he spoke, he knew the answer wasn't enough for either of them. The girl frowned, considering this, then leaned closer to him as if sharing a secret, whispering that princesses were supposed to smile and be happy because stories always ended that way. And he felt a quiet ache because life had taught him endings were rarely so simple. He remembered how his own story had changed years ago, when his wife had slipped out of their lives like a shadow at dusk, leaving him with a toddler, unanswered questions, and the responsibility of becoming both anchor and sail for a child who deserved more than broken explanations. Since then, he had learned to read rooms quickly, to sense pain in others the way sailors sense storms, and something about the woman's solitude tugged at him with the same pull he once felt when he looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. His daughter kept watching the woman, her gaze open and unguarded, and before he could stop her, she lifted her hand in a small, tentative wave, a gesture so innocent it carried no expectation. The woman noticed, startled, her eyes lifting for the first time. And when they met the child's face, something flickered there. Surprise followed by hesitation, then a faint, almost apologetic smile that appeared and vanished too quickly. The father felt the moment stretch, fragile as glass, and in that space he sensed an unspoken story unfolding, one that had nothing to do with fairy tales, yet carried the same longing for rescue, though he knew better than to believe in heroes arriving on cue. His daughter leaned closer again and whispered that the princess didn't wave back properly, that maybe she was sad because no one talked to her, and he saw in his child the same instinct that had once driven him to knock on his elderly neighbor's door just to check if she was still alive after not seeing her for days. He hesitated because life had taught him caution, taught him that stepping into someone else's pain could change the shape of your own. But he also knew what it felt like to sit in public spaces, feeling invisible, carrying grief like a secret weight while the world rushed past. He cleared his throat, stood slightly, and offered the woman a polite, gentle smile, one that carried no demand, no assumption, just acknowledgement, and said something simple about the seat being free if she preferred more space. Though both of them knew the words weren't the real invitation. She looked at him for a long second, measuring not just the offer, but the man behind it, the child at his side, the sincerity in his eyes, and the walls she had built around herself seemed to waver. His daughter, emboldened, slid her coloring book a little closer to the edge of the table, as if preparing to share it. And in that quiet gesture, there was more courage than he had felt in himself for years. The woman finally spoke. her voice soft, almost unused, thanking him and declining the seat. But her eyes lingered on the child, and when she added that the drawing looked beautiful, even though she couldn't see it clearly, the girl beamed as if she had been knighted. The father felt something shift, subtle yet unmistakable, like the first crack in a long frozen surface, and he realized that whatever story this woman carried, whatever sadness had settled on her shoulders, it had just been seen, if only for a moment. His daughter leaned back, satisfied, whispering that the princess smiled a little, and he nodded, understanding that sometimes change didn't arrive with grand gestures or dramatic words, but with the smallest acts of noticing, the kind that children offered freely and adults often forgot. As he sat back down, his hands still wrapped around his daughter's, he wondered not about how to fix what he didn't understand, but whether simply staying present, simply choosing kindness over distance, might be the beginning of a chapter none of them knew they needed. And as the cafe's quiet rhythm continued around them, he sensed that his daughter's question had already set something in motion that could not be undone. The moment didn't end when the woman looked back down at her plate, because something invisible had already crossed the space between them, settling quietly into the air like a held breath. And the father felt it as clearly as he felt his daughter's small hand in his own. Time moved forward in ordinary ways, the clink of cups, the murmur of other conversations, but for him, everything seemed tuned to a softer frequency, one where small choices suddenly mattered more than big plans. His daughter picked up a purple pencil and began coloring again, though she kept glancing toward the woman as if checking whether the princess was still there, still real. And when the woman stood to leave, gathering her scarf with careful movements, the girl slipped her hand free and rose halfway from her chair before he could stop her. She held up the coloring book, open to a page where a princess stood beneath a wide sky, not perfect, not finished, but filled with earnest effort, and said simply that she had drawn it for her, that princesses shouldn't leave without their pictures. The cafe seemed to pause as the woman turned, surprise softening into something like disbelief, and she approached slowly, as though afraid the moment might break if she moved too fast. She accepted the book with trembling fingers, her eyes filling not with tears, but with a brightness that suggested tears had been waiting a long time for permission, and she crouched slightly to meet the child's gaze, thanking her in a voice that cracked despite her effort to keep it steady. The father watched, his chest tight, because he recognized that sound, the sound of someone unused to being seen, and he realized that his daughter, without knowing it, had reached a place in the woman that words rarely touched. The woman hesitated, then asked the girl's name, repeating it as if committing it to memory. And when she looked up at the father, her expression carried gratitude mixed with something heavier, an unspoken apology for her sadness intruding on their day. He shook his head gently, telling her there was nothing to apologize for, that sometimes days were just heavy. And she nodded as if relieved to hear someone say it out loud. She explained, without details, that she had come there often with someone who no longer came, that routines lingered even after people left, and the father felt the echo of his own past in her words, the way habits could become ghosts. His daughter listened, serious now, then declared that when people went away, they sometimes came back in different stories, and the woman laughed softly at that, the sound surprising all of them. The laughter didn't erase the sadness, but it softened its edges, making room for something gentler. And as the woman straightened, she asked if she could keep the drawing, promising to put it somewhere she could see it every day. The girl nodded solemnly, as if granting a great honor, and returned to her seat, satisfied that her task was complete. The woman lingered a moment longer, looking at the father with a question in her eyes, Not a question about romance or rescue, but about understanding, and he met it honestly, letting her see that he understood more than he could say. When she finally left, the space she had occupied felt different. Not empty, but changed, and the father exhaled slowly, unaware he had been holding his breath. His daughter leaned against him and asked if the princess would be okay now, and he answered truthfully that he didn't know. But that being kind never hurt, and sometimes it helped more than we could see. They finished their drinks, packed away the pencils, and stepped back into the flow of the day, carrying the moment with them like a quiet promise. That evening, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she asked him to tell her a story about a princess who was sad until a little girl reminded her she wasn't alone. And as he spoke, he realized the story wasn't just for her. Somewhere across the city, a woman would unfold a coloring book and remember a child's open heart, and somewhere inside him, a single father would remember that even in lives shaped by loss, small acts could redraw the lines of a story, not by changing the past, but by gently, bravely changing what came next.